Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome. I'm Ross, and I'm live from the Athenaeum in Jackson, Louisiana, home of HOREB Institute for the historical and objective research and exploration of the Bible. And I want to thank you very much for joining me today for my class that I've titled The End of Days and the Torah. We're working through the Pentateuch, the annual cycle of readings, the life and laws of Moses. We're going through a series within our series. The bigger series is Pentateuch in Perspective, but we're doing the book of Numbers right now. So we're dealing with a mini-series, you might call it, that I've called The Wilderness Wanderings, W-O-N-D-E-R, Wanderings. We're in Parsha Pinchas. Now, many of you have the Torah tablets, so if you have Parsha Pinchas, I'd like to tell you that it begins in Numbers chapter 25 and verse 10, which is on page 186, and that goes all the way through Numbers chapter 30 and verse 1, which is on page 220. Now, so if you're thinking about, here's where we're at today. We're within this window of text, and I'm going to be focusing on a much narrower, more narrow, I guess I could say, part of this Torah portion, Pinchas. I want to begin today's class with what might be described and has been described, and I believe it's described properly as the final recorded words of Moses. The final recorded words of Moses. Now, I learned this from Richard Elliott Friedman, as you will see in a moment, but I want to read to you, you join me, Numbers chapter 27, verses 15 through 17. This is on page 204 in the Numbers Torah tablet. We're going to read verse 15 to 17. And Moses spake unto Jehovah, saying, Let Jehovah, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who may go out before them, and who may come in before them, and who may lead them out, and who may bring them in, that the congregation of Jehovah be not as sheep which hath no shepherd, which have no shepherd. Very beautiful words here. And if we know and are careful to observe the chronological context, we can come to the conclusion that Richard Elliott Friedman did, that these are the last words of Moses. Now, you may be thinking, but hang on, we're in the book of Numbers, Ross. We're not even done with the book of Numbers. We're in Numbers chapter 27. How could this possibly be the final words of Moses to God? This is the purpose of today's class. You will see things that you may not have noticed before. You'll have to pay attention, though, and that's what we're here working on together. Now, again, I mentioned that I learned this from Richard Elliott Friedman. I learned it in his commentary on the Torah on page 521. Commentary on the Torah. You can get these on Amazon. You can even get them used. They're paperback, not very expensive. It includes his translation of the Pentateuch. It's got the Hebrew and the English on facing columns. And then it's got a really good, very sound, academic, if you will, commentary. And it's very, very good. I highly encourage you to find that and get it. In fact, I'll post the link later. Moses, this is what he says on page 521. Moses spoke to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. This is the last time that Moses is quoted as saying anything to God. In Deuteronomy, Moses will report to the people his past conversations with God, but these are the last words of Moses to God in the Torah. I'll read that again. These are the last words of Moses to God in the Torah. Now, we have to unpack this, and that's what today's class is all about. But let me just say that if these are the last words of Moses to God, and I believe they are, I wanted to point out there is a title, a designation that Moses uses for God in this passage that's only used one other time. It's also in the book of Numbers. It's in Numbers chapter 16 and 22 and Numbers 22 and 16. Numbers 27 and 16. And it's Jehovah, the God of the spirits of all flesh. Interesting designation. By the way, in the Numbers tablet, all of the references to deity, to God, to the God, Ha Elohim, are in bold and small caps, so they really stand out in the text to help you identify that. Jehovah is the designation that the ASV uses, God of the spirits of all flesh. So he is appealing to God, and this is what's so interesting, that the final words of Moses, we've been with Moses since Exodus chapter 2, and these are the final words between Moses and God, and they're about the concern that Moses has over the people. In other words, what will happen to these people, says Moses, my paraphrase, when I'm not around? Now, later he's going to say, I know it's going to happen. You're going to go into apostasy. But at this point, he's requesting of the God of the spirits of all flesh to give them someone who will go out before them and come in before them, who will lead them out, who will bring them in. This is a phrase that we find throughout the biblical text in several different places, not only in the Torah and the prophets and the writings, but it refers to someone who is a leader, who can lead the people. And I love this phrase, so that they be not as sheep without a shepherd. Now, this particular phrase, we're going to put the passages, I'm not going to read the other passages from the Tanakh, but we're going to put these passages in the chat for you, the passages that concern sheep without a shepherd. 1 Kings 22:17, Ezekiel 34:5, Zechariah chapter 10 and verse 2, and then a couple of New Testament gospel passages, Matthew 9:36 and Mark 6:34. And some of you better get used to seeing those gospel references. We've got a new series coming up, but more on that later. Right now, we're going to focus on the end of days and of the Torah. Now, when Moses requests that God appoint a man over the congregation so that the children of Israel be not as sheep without a shepherd, what is the response? This is where we're going next, and it logically flows in the book of Numbers chapter 27. This is still part of our parsha for this particular Torah portion. If you look at 27, verse 18 through 21, also on page 204, and Jehovah said to Moses, take thee Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay thy hand upon him, and set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, and give him a charge in their sight. And thou shalt put honor, your honor, upon him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may obey. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before Jehovah. At his word shall they go out, and at his word shall they come in, both he and all the children of Israel with him, even all the congregation. So the response to Moses' request that God would assign someone to be the leader of the people is satisfied. God says, yeah, take Joshua and you're going to bring him. He is going to be, my words again, he will be that shepherd for the sheep. Moses is to lay his hands on Joshua in the presence of Eleazar. Eleazar is going to be right there when this takes place, and the congregation will witness this, and he's going to give him a public charge. This is what we're reading about here. Not only that, but Eleazar is going to be an assistant, if you will, in in whenever Joshua needs to communicate with God. Eleazar is going to use the Urim. All right? Now, let me make this point because a lot of people miss this, and a lot of it's because of orthodoxy and the traditions that have developed. A lot of times you'll read and hear from rabbinic sources or rabbis who are teaching this subject. Usually it's counter-missionaries who want to say that there is no way that the prophet like Moses is Jesus because that was Joshua. Well, let me tell you something. That part is for a later discussion. But is Joshua the prophet like Moses predicted in Deuteronomy 18? And the answer is no. The answer is no. Contrary to popular traditional belief, a prophet like Moses who spoke mouth to mouth with God, like Moses spoke to God like a man speaks to his neighbor, right? This is different. Now, that's not the way Joshua is going to communicate with God. The way Joshua, according to this text, the way Joshua is going to communicate with God is going to be through an intermediary, a priest by the name of Eleazar, who will utilize a tool, the Urim. Now, many of you have heard about the Urim and the Tumim, translated often lights and perfection. What is this? It's for another class as well, but it is an interesting devices. I know I've read all the things that you probably have. They glowed, they did this, they somehow were used in an oracular fashion where you could communicate and God could communicate through flashing lights and not sure. By the way, where is the Urim and the Tumim? Like so many other things, no one knows. Never been seen again. But in this text, Joshua is to be the one to take over after Moses is gone, not as a prophet like Moses, as tradition teaches, but as a leader who will go out before, bring them in, and so forth. That is what we're dealing with here. And Moses did it. Did what? Moses did exactly what he was told to do. He brings Joshua in the presence of Eleazar and before the congregation, and he charges him and makes him the person to replace Moses, makes Joshua his replacement in front of the people. Now, let's look at chapter 27 of Numbers, verses 22 and 23, because some of you might say, no, he didn't do that yet. Well, verse 22, page 204. And Moses did as Joshua commanded him. And he took Joshua and he set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation. He laid his hands on him and gave him charge as Jehovah spake by Moses. So God, the way we're to understand this is God is saying the words and Moses is repeating them, if you will. And this ordination ceremony, remember he said, bring him up, put your hands on him and so forth. And this is going to seal and appoint Joshua as the replacement, the leader of the people of Israel. Now, the question that I have is, where are we? I mean, chronologically, where are we? I mean, Moses brings up Joshua. He puts his hands on him in front of Eleazar and right there, and the people are watching, and he commissions him, and evidently God is speaking. Where are we? Or perhaps a better way to put it, I should say, not where are we, but when? When are we? Where are we at chronologically in this particular section? Now, let me tell you, chapter 28 is not going to help us understand chronologically where we are. Numbers 28 is not going to help us. Numbers 29 is not going to help us. And why would I say that? Well, go with me, if you have the Jewish Study Bible, the link's in the notes. But if you look at page 340 on the Jewish Study Bible, page 340. This is going to put us in this. It's a wonderful study Bible, particularly if you're interested in the Jewish approach to the Scriptures. Page 340, and I want you to look at the note on chapter 20. It says 28, 1 through 30, verse 1. And its heading is the calendar of the public cult. And the footnote says, chapters 28 and 29 are an insertion into the narrative consisting of ritual prescriptions that delineate the daily Sabbath, new moon, and festival schedule of offerings. And then it goes in to say, the variety, the different animals, the sacrifices, and so forth. The Numbers calendar expands on the calendar in Leviticus 23, also a product of priestly tradition, by adding daily and new moon rituals and so forth. And it goes on and it talks about how this is clearly, according to academic approaches to the Scripture, a later insertion. In other words, if you thought you knew what you needed to know about the festivals because of, say, Leviticus 23, there's some new material here. You got to have it. And it's not necessarily jiving, if you will. It seems to contradict in places or offer contrary different views. But one of the things that I find interesting is we taught a class not long ago where we talked about are the sacrifices considered food for God? And contrary to that view, we have quite a few texts. Psalm 50 comes to mind. If I were hungry, would I call to you, and so forth. But in this particular text, in Numbers 28, we do get the idea because the sacrifices are treated as food. In fact, it says in 28:2, offerings of food do me, literally my food, in chapter 28, verse 2. Okay, but again, I divert myself. Let me get back onto the topic. So 28 and 29 don't give us any information that helps us put this story of Moses charging Joshua in the presence of the people. It doesn't give us any chronological clue as to when we are. And chapter 27 begins with the story of the daughters of Zelophehad. Zelophehad has died, and his daughters want to bring their case up the line and tell Moses, hey, what about us? Our father died. It wasn't because of the sin. It was so forth and so on. And do we just not get an inheritance? Who gets our father's inheritance? And so the discussion is had, and God says, hey, the daughters of Zelophehad are right. But then right after the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, remember, we're sandwiched in between. The text I'm focused on now is sandwiched in between the narrative about the daughters of Zelophehad and chapter 28 and 29, which deal with sacrifices and festival sacrifices and all that kind of, nothing chronological there. So what is it that we really ought to look for in terms of context? Well, let's go right before what I opened up. Look at verse 12 of Numbers 27. Numbers 27:12, which is on page 202. By the way, this follows a white space. So this is a new section that follows right after this discussion with the daughters of Zelophehad. And it says in verse 12, and Jehovah said unto Moses, get thee up into this mountain of Abarim, and behold the land which I have given unto the children of Israel. Moses, says Jehovah, get thee up into this mountain of Abarim. Get thee up. Mountain of Abarim. What is that? In Hebrew, it's Har Ha'avarim. Har, the mountain, Ha'avarim. And if you look at this word, of course, it's a common name, meaning this is the name of a mountainous region. But if we look at the Hebrew behind it, at least, it appears to mean, and I didn't find this in a commentary, but it's based on the same word, which means to cross or pass over. So it feels like the author is telling us that Moses ascends a mountain that is associated with a crossing point, a passing point. Because if you notice, avar in Hebrew is the same word which is tied to the word Hebrew, which means the one who crossed over. Remember in Genesis 14, Abraham is one who is the Ivri. So an Ivri, Ayin Beit Resh, is the root word of this mountain, the Abarim. But we'll talk more about that in the after-class discussion, I'm sure. It's from here, Har HaAvarim, that Moses is to gaze upon the promised land. But this passage in Numbers chapter 27 is not the only passage in the Hebrew Pentateuch, which tells the story of God telling Moses to get up that mountain and look. So a couple of years ago, when I noticed this, I pulled these texts together and I studied them and thought about them as a singular narrative block, and most people haven't really thought about this, and things begin to make sense. Why, in other words, why is it in Numbers 27 that we meet with the final words of Moses? Well, behold, I show you a mystery. Look with me in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 27, which is on page 24 of the Deuteronomy tablet. Deuteronomy 3:27 says, "Get thee up unto the top of Pisgah, and lift up thine eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward, and behold with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over this Jordan." Now, context of Deuteronomy chapter 3, by the way, is a transfer of leadership, Moses transferring leadership to Joshua. Well, Ross, that sounds pretty familiar. It sounds like what we see in Numbers chapter 27. Remember in Numbers 27 when I told you, the Bible told you, and I just shared it with you, that Moses is told, appoint Joshua and then get up the mountain, and he does it. It says he did it. Well, here the context is get you up to the top of, notice it's called Pisgah. We're going to talk about that. Lift your eyes all around, and then, but verse 28 and following says, but you need to, appoint your follower. So Joshua, we'll get into that more. For now, what we have to do is we have to face the fact that Numbers chapter 27 and Deuteronomy chapter 3 and verse 27 are not yet the only accounts of God telling Moses to climb that mountain. So wait a minute. What I'm telling you, get this, is that we've got at least two accounts already within the Pentateuch which describe the charge from God to Moses to get up the mountain, to look around, and to transfer the leadership to Joshua. So we've got to look at them all, right? So now let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 48 and 49. That's on page 208. Now, obviously, what I want you to understand is that these texts describing the same event must be examined together. They have to be studied together, which is the point of the class today. So if I look at 32, verse 48, and Jehovah spake unto Moses that selfsame day, I wonder what day he's talking about, saying, get thee up into this mountain of Avarim, unto Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, that is over against Jericho, and behold the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel for a possession. Interesting. So now we've got Numbers 27, Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 27, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 48 and 49, all describing the same event. Do this, Moses. And we're not done yet. This is an important part of the story. It appears that we have several different sources that have recorded it. Now, I know what people think. People think that this is just that the former ones are presented as, hey, Moses, and sometime from now, not now, but sometime in the near future, you're going to go up and you're going to look from Abarim or Pisgah or Nebo, but you're going to look out over the promised land and so forth. But you need to anoint, lay your hands on Joshua. They believe that those are all just getting him ready. Not yet, Moses, I'm just getting you ready for this. And he does it again and again and again. What I am proposing is that doesn't feel like what we see when we examine these texts. What it really looks like is these are different stories, different versions, different pieces that have come together into the final redacted form of the Torah. Now, what I want you to see next is that we're not done yet. Go with me to Deuteronomy 34, which is also in the Torah tablet. This one is on 216. Deuteronomy 34, verses 1 through 4 says, And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah that is over against Jericho. And Jehovah showed him all the land of Gilead unto Dan and all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah unto the hinder sea, and the south, and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees unto Zoar. And Jehovah said unto him, This is the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed. I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. Let me tell you a couple of things about this. Number one, it could not have been anything but the morning. Now, how would I know that? Because I've been there several times. He couldn't have seen, first of all, the joke among the tour guides is if he saw all of that, that was a miracle. Because although it is beautiful, it is a beautiful view, it's very often, most often, I have never been there where it's not covered in a haze. And I've been there a few times. And that's what tour guides that go there almost every day say. They smile as you look out, you want to see what Moses saw. But the reason I know it was morning is because if he was looking in the evening, he would be staring into the sun and wouldn't be able to see anything, right? So these are types of clues that we get from the text when I read these things that make it make sense to me. Okay, now, again, what most people think is that this is the actual Moses going up and, he's seeing the land. He's not seen it before, that they think that you read Numbers and it says you're going to do this, but it's going to come later. You read in Deuteronomy 3, you're going to do this, but it's going to come later. They read Deuteronomy 32, verse 48 through 52, you're going to do this, Moses, but you're going to do it later. But what I'm suggesting is that that's not the case. I'm suggesting that when you turn the page from Numbers into Deuteronomy, you are crossing a made-up line. That if you took the book of Deuteronomy, and I'm just going to use this broadly, we're going to get more into this. We have a whole study of Deuteronomy coming up. But I'm going to slide Deuteronomy back, slide, and I'm going to align certain textual narrative blocks so that we recognize that these arbitrary book divisions aren't necessarily giving us things in a chronological order. We've been doing this for the entire series, right? So for instance, and I'm just going to touch this and we're going to move on. Exodus chapter 40 describes when the tabernacle was set up. We know a date. We actually have a date. When we read Leviticus, we know that Leviticus happened in a period of time that's absorbed into the narratives in the end of Exodus and the beginning of the book of Numbers. So what I'm suggesting is you slide these together and align them based on what the text says. Then you can understand these stories much better. I hope that made sense. But I don't believe that what we encounter in Numbers 27, Deuteronomy 3, Deuteronomy 32, Deuteronomy 34 are Moses, you're going to do this, Moses, you're going to do this, Moses, you're going to do this. Moses did this. And the reason is because of what we read all the way back in Numbers 27. He's got to anoint, he's got to charge, he's got to transfer the leadership to Joshua. And we see that in the later accounts. And that happened in the text in Numbers 27. Here we go. In Numbers 27, after the charge to climb and look, Moses is told the following. Go with me to Numbers 27, 12 and 13. Page 202 in the Torah tablet. 12 and 13. And Jehovah said unto Moses, Get thee up into this mountain of Abarim, and behold the land which I have given unto the children of Israel. And when you have seen it, you also shall be gathered unto thy people, as Aaron thy brother was gathered, because ye rebelled. We're not going to get there yet. You're going to be gathered. Just strike that last bit. What Moses is told is you're going to go up the mountain of Abarim. You're going to look around. You're going to see the land that I promised to give the children of Israel. And once you've seen it, you're going to be gathered to your people like Aaron was gathered to his people. Don't read ahead. I almost messed it up. So he's told he'll die, and he sees it. After he sees the land, he's going to be gathered to his people. By the way, I love this particular phrase, to be gathered to the people. Now, I want to look at a couple of other passages about this charge. Go up, look around, you're going to die. Deuteronomy 32 and verse 50. I'm going to look at three passages from Deuteronomy, the first of which is Deuteronomy 32:50 on page 210 of the Torah tablet. And it says, y'all ready for this? 32:50. By the way, as follows, the same thing we just read in the other passage, which you're going to see the land which I gave the children of Israel for possession. Verse 50, and die in the mount, whither thou goest up, and be gathered unto thy people, as Aaron thy brother died in Mount Hor and was gathered unto his people. Right? There we go. Now look down at verse 52. For thou shalt see the land before thee, but thou shalt not go thither into the land which I give the children of Israel. Now, look with me at Deuteronomy 3, verse 27, which is on page 24 of the tablet. Here we go, 3:27. Get thee up unto the top of Pisgah, lift up thine eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward, and behold with thine eyes, for thou shalt not go over this Jordan. And of course, this narrative, like the others, is set in the context of prepare Joshua to take over. So he's not going to go. He's told, you're going to go up, look around, you're going to see the land, but you're not going to cross over. Go up, see the land, you're not going to cross over. Go up, see the land, but you're not going to cross over. The question is why? Question is why? You're telling me, thinks Moses, after all of this, after walking and working through 40 years plus some for good time, I'm not going to go in. You would think that's the way he would feel. And then people get into all sorts of debates as to why he's not allowed to go in. You ever hear these debates? You ever get into one of these discussions? And the reason there are discussions about this is because we've got different sources. The answer to the question of why is he not allowed to go into the promised land after all that he's been through with these people, the answer is it depends. Depends on what text you read. Now, I want you to go with me to Deuteronomy chapter 1. Deuteronomy chapter 1. We're going to go all the way back to Deuteronomy 1, verse 34 on page 8 of the Torah tablet. Here we go. We're going to begin in verse 34. And Jehovah heard the voice of your words and was wroth, and swear, saying, surely there shall not come one of these men of this evil generation see this good land which I swear to give unto your fathers, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh. He shall see it, and to him will I give the land that he hath trodden upon, and to his children, because he has wholly followed Jehovah. Also, Jehovah was angry with me for your sakes. Jehovah was angry with me for your sakes. Jehovah was angry with me for your sake, saying, you shall not go in thither. So he's saying, let me get this straight now. He's saying that God heard their words and was angry, and he's not going to let them go in, and except for Caleb, because he's followed God. And God was angry with Moses. This is first person. He was angry with me because of y'all, is what he's saying. Now, is that so? It is according to Moses here in this first person text, on your account. And because of something they did, says Moses, because of a reason attributable to the people, God's mad at him. He's not going to let him go in because of something they did. Well, maybe that's just the only text that says that. No, it's not. No, it's not. We find other texts. Let's look at Deuteronomy 3, verse 26. That would be on page 24 of your Torah tablet. Deuteronomy 3:26. But Jehovah was wroth with me for your sakes, and hearkened not unto me. And Jehovah said unto me, let it suffice thee, speak no more unto me of this matter. Now, context is, Moses is wanting to go in, and God tells him no. No. In fact, he tells him the next verse is, go up to the top of Pisgah. Interesting. Now, he's angry for your sake. Moses is, again, first person, God is mad at him for your sake. And then, of course, this is followed by, go up, look around, and charge Joshua. And maybe that's the only two that say that it was the people's fault, but no, it's not. No, it's not. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 21. That would be on page 30 in your tablet. Deuteronomy 4:21. Let's look at 21 and 22. Furthermore, Jehovah was angry with me for your sakes, and swear that I should not go over the Jordan, that I should not go in unto the good land which Jehovah thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. But I must die in this land. I must not go over the Jordan, but ye shall go over and possess that good land. Then he warns them, don't you fall into apostasy. Okay, so there we've got a few texts, 3 texts specifically, where Moses, first person in all 3 of these texts, first person. By the way, none of the other texts in the book of Numbers, in fact, nothing in the book of Exodus, nothing in the book of Leviticus, nothing in the book of Numbers is first person. Most of Deuteronomy is not in the first person, but only in Deuteronomy do we encounter a core of first person material. It's only natural that when a person records something, they do that in the first person. The third person narratives that we see, someone else is telling the story. It's not Moses, okay? But here, interestingly enough, 3 occurrences in Deuteronomy in first person text have us listening and reading that Moses says, y'all got me in trouble. It's your problem, your fault, that I'm not crossing into the land. Now, he's going to die in Moab. Now, let's look at Deuteronomy 34, verse 4, page 216 of the tablet. Let's see what it says here. Deuteronomy 34:4 says, "And Jehovah said unto him," by the way, this is third person, right? Starts in verse 1, Moses went up from the plains of Moab. He didn't write that. Verse 4, "And Jehovah said unto him," this is Moses he's talking to clearly, "This is the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed. I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither." So this is God telling Moses, you're going to go over. Would have been a good opportunity for him to say why, but he doesn't give a reason why here. Now, the question is Moses' memory selective? Is Moses' memory selective? In other words, is there maybe he knows that it was really him that was the problem all along, but he's thinking, well, I'm writing the history, so I can put this how I want to, and I'm going to, in several places, say that it wasn't my fault that I can't go over, it's their fault. And that's one option. So you might believe that one. I don't believe Moses thought like that. I don't believe that Moses was sneaky and deceptive like that. But that's what some people would say. Now, the question is, do we have other reasons given by other accounts, other sources as to why Moses can't go over? Moses is certain. He's certain in every first-person account. The reason he can't go over, he's not going over thither, as the ASV puts it, is because of them. He was angry. God was angry at him because of the people. And the question is that selective memory? Now, there are two texts which I want to bring to your attention to think about together. Numbers 27:14, which is on page 204 of the Numbers tablet, and Deuteronomy 32:51, which is on page 210 of the Deuteronomy tablet. And I'm going to read those. Here's what it says in Numbers 27:14. Because, this is why he can't go over. According to Numbers 27, third person account. "Because ye rebelled against my word in the wilderness of sin, in the strife of the congregation, to sanctify me at the waters before their eyes." Parenthetical statement follows. "These are the words of the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin." Okay, so this has God telling Moses, now Aaron's already dead. This is God telling Moses, according to the priestly writer here, that the reason that they're not going to cross over is because they rebelled against his word in the wilderness of Zin, right? They didn't sanctify him. And people try to figure out what that means. I've done that. I've been part of that exercise. Now, Deuteronomy 32:51, let's see what it says. "Because ye trespassed against me in the midst of the children of Israel at the waters of Meribah of Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin, because ye sanctified me not in the midst of the children of Israel." So these basically say the same thing. They refer to an event, the waters of Meribah. Now the question is, which episode is it? We've got two different sources, waters of Meribah, Exodus 17 and Numbers chapter 20. So you got to sort out your waters of Meribah stories. But either way, if you read these two texts, you get some of the same things we get in Moses' first-person accounts. You're not going to cross over. You're going to die in the land of Moab. And then these two texts say very clearly, and it's because you and Aaron didn't sanctify me at the waters of Meribah. Now, there are other texts which talk about what they did at the waters of Meribah. Look with me at Psalm 106, verse 32. I've got so many Bibles out, I'm just going to pick one. Psalm 106 and verse 32. Let's see what it says. Psalm 106, 32. They provoked wrath at the waters of Meribah, and Moses suffered on their account, because they rebelled against him, and he spoke rashly. What's going on here? The waters of Meribah, and we're either talking about Numbers chapter 20, verses 2 through 13, or Exodus 17, verses 1 through 7. You got to fix that. You got to figure that out. Which waters of Meribah are we talking about here? But this particular passage, Psalm 106, 32, 33, knows that there was a provocation of wrath at the waters of Meribah, and Moses suffered on their account. So this writer, and we don't get at the beginning of Psalm 106 a psalm of the sons of, or a psalm of David. We don't know, right? Undecided who wrote it. But whoever wrote it knows that there was a wrath that Moses, he knows Moses' account, or she. I guess we could say she wrote it. I don't know. Whoever wrote this knows that Moses suffered. But it adds the fact that Moses spoke rashly. Now, that would make us think that we're talking about Exodus 17 because, God tells him do this, and he strikes the rock, and what does he say? Gather up, you rebels. And God didn't tell him to berate the children of Israel. So some rabbis say, yeah, well, he was ugly. He spoke ugly to them, and that's why. Be that as it may, the main point I want to show you is that Psalm 106:32 seems to know Moses' account, that the reason God is mad at Moses is something they did. It just adds this one caveat. We'll talk about that in the discussion after. Now, the title of my class was The End of Days and the Torah. And I believe we see both of those in this clever title, if I may say so myself. At least in one account, we see all of the following. We see the end of days, meaning the end of Moses' days, right? That's why the thumbnail is so beautifully put together. The final days of Moses. And I'm going to even take that a little bit. It's the last day of Moses we're talking about. We're really zooming in on that last day. And, by the way, the end of the Torah. I'm not talking about the Pauline Christianity, the fundamental evangelical view that the end of the law, I'm not talking about that kind of end of the law. I'm talking about when the Torah was actually completed. When was it completed? Was it completed, all along in stages? Did Moses sit down and write it all? What do we know about the end of the law? Now, I want you to go with me to chapter 31 of Deuteronomy, which I believe tells the story of the end of the law. Deuteronomy 31, verses 1 and 2, which is on page 192 of the Torah tablet. Here we go. Again, not only should we ask the questions, the typical reporter questions, who, what, when, where, why. When we look at this, we ought to really be focused on when does this supposedly take place? Who wrote it, right? Now, if you approach this from a fundamental apologetic, orthodox viewpoint, and you go, well, Moses wrote it, Ross. Even the part about he died, well, maybe not that. But, you get into all that traditional stuff, you're going to miss this totally. You're just going to be pulled along, by a nose ring, and you're going to believe whatever people tell you. That's not what we're doing here. We want to read the text carefully. 31:1. And Moses went and spake these words unto all Israel. Who's telling this story? It's not Moses. And he said unto them, I'm 120 years old this day, and I can no more go out and come in. You see? He's telling us about a time where he has this conversation with God. Remember in Numbers 27, I want you to appoint somebody that can go out and come in and so forth. And Jehovah has said unto me, thou shalt not go over this Jordan. Now, let me ask you, does it give a reason why? Not here. Just the point that he's 120 that day, and he says, I can't go in and out, and God said, you're not going to cross over. That kind of goes with what we read in Deuteronomy 34, doesn't it? Okay. Well, let's think about this. What we've got in 31 is, we know everyone would agree that we're at the end. We're toward the end, right? We're towards the end, and the third person narrator is describing that end. And by the way, I'm going to qualify this. If you think that there is no end, stay tuned and listen to what Scripture says. Verse 9, by the way, Moses hands his completed Torah to those responsible for its safe keeping. And I'll just flip over to that since I'm right here. And Moses wrote, HaTorah Hazot. Moses wrote this law and delivered it unto the priests, the sons of Levi, that bear the ark of the covenant of Jehovah, and to all the elders of Israel. So Moses wrote that law. It's done. It's finished. It's ended. He rolls it up or folds it. I think he might have folded it. But either way, it's a lot smaller. It's a different Torah scroll. It's not Deuteronomy. It's not Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy 34:12. That's not what we're talking about here. And let me explain. Because we still have 3 chapters left of Deuteronomy and the Torah's done. So what's in it? That's the question. That's been driving me for 5 years now. The apologist, the fundamentalist, the orthodox, they don't want to talk about this because it challenges their beliefs in their head and not in their heart, but it's just their traditions. What I'm doing is saying I'm done with that. I want to read the text and actually learn what it says, what it means. This says Moses wrote the law. Now, in verse 14, it says Moses is told that the time of his death is drawing near, and so he's supposed to bring Joshua. Do you get that we're talking about the same context as we saw in Numbers chapter 27, in Deuteronomy chapter 3, in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 48 through 52, in Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 1 through 4. You see, it's all telling, we're telling the whole story. It's all right there together. Now, let's continue to work through it. If we look at chapter 31, verse 24 through 26, we see that Moses again mentions, the third person narrator actually, mentions the handing over by Moses of his completed Torah. And these are all just as I'm speaking. In other words, I didn't say, here, give me a scroll with this text on it, but you just flip the page. I mean, it's in 31, verse 24 through 26, you have it right there. It came to pass when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this Torah in a scroll until they were finished. They're finished. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the Torah is finished in chapter 31. I might even say it's really finished in Numbers 27. When the events of Numbers 27 are given, you betcha. Our Torah is completed, and a third-person narrator is telling us this story. The transfer of leadership to Joshua is done. It happened back in Numbers 27. It happened in Deuteronomy chapter 3, Deuteronomy chapter 32, Deuteronomy chapter 31. Our narrator tells us that Moses then warned the children of Israel against apostasy, right? You remember the story about the song and so forth, and all of this happens. It's all described as taking place. This point. You have to connect the dots. It is a great mystery, but it's not so mysterious when we look for clues within the text. When we find certain words and phrases and we align those to tell the narrative in its most full sense, it begins to make sense. Now, the Torah complete, the transfer of leadership to Joshua has already happened. Our narrator tells us that Moses warns the children of Israel that once he's dead, he knows that they're going to go into apostasy. And then Moses made his way up the mountain, where he was shown the land of promise, but he's not going to go in. We have one more class in the book of Numbers before we start Deuteronomy. But let me just say this. Interestingly enough, the way the Moses scroll ends, if you've read my book, The Moses Scroll, you think, well, I wonder what it has in the Moses Scroll. Well, on page 170 of the Moses Scroll, this is where I record my translation of the text as it was received. This is what it says. I'm going to pick up in fragment H, column B. It says, Elohim will cause you to perish. He's talking about if you turn your back and so forth. He'll destroy you from upon the face of the ground. You are to enter there to possess it. I am 120 years old today. So this matches what we see in Deuteronomy. I'm unable to go out or to come in before you, and Elohim has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. Joshua, who stands before you, he will cross the Jordan, and he will go with you into the good land that you are to enter there to possess it. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear and do not be dismayed, because Elohim, your Elohim, he will go before you. Ladies and gentlemen, the end of days, the end of Moses' days, and the end of the Torah take place in narratives that have been pieced together over time. But in order to get a good glimpse of that final day of Moses, you have to pull together texts from the end of the book of Numbers and throughout Deuteronomy. You pull it together and everything comes into focus. Speaking of focus, we're going to focus on this and many other subjects in the after-class discussion. Meet me in the Zoom if you're part of the Yachad. If you are not yet part of the Yachad, that's okay. You can participate for a little while with us in YouTube. You'll be directed there automatically. If you're not, the link is in the description of this video. Thank you very much for joining me. Don't forget to order your Deuteronomy Torah tablet. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Meet me in the Zoom.